The little girl didn't raise her voice when she said it, but every man in the room heard her clearly. "I'm here to collect the debt you owe my daddy." No one laughed this time. Not after what happened next. The doors to the private club had barely finished swinging shut behind her when the tension began to coil through the room like a live wire. It was the kind of place where no one entered without permission, where grown men with power and reputation waited weeks for a meeting, and yet somehow she had walked in alone, past security, past armed guards, past layers of protection that had stopped far more dangerous people than her. The music had died first, the low hum of conversation following seconds later, until all that remained was the faint clink of ice in glasses and the soft echo of her shoes tapping against polished marble. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply walked forward, small hands at her sides, her expression calm in a way that didn't belong to a child. Two guards moved instinctively to intercept her, one reaching out as if to grab her shoulder, but a single voice from across the room stopped him cold. "Let her through." The command didn't need to be repeated. It came from the man seated at the center table, the one everyone else took their cues from, the one whose presence alone had turned this room into something closer to a throne room than a club. He hadn't stood, hadn't even shifted much, but his eyes were locked on the girl with a sharpness that cut through the distance between them. The guards stepped aside immediately, uncertainty flickering across their faces, and the girl continued walking as if she had expected nothing less. She passed tables filled with men who had built empires out of fear and loyalty, men who now found themselves watching her with something unfamiliar in their eyes. Not amusement, not irritation, something closer to unease. Because children didn't belong here. And yet, she didn't look lost. She looked like she had come for something. When she finally reached the table, she stopped just short of it and looked up at the man seated there. Up close, the contrast was almost absurd. He was older, composed, dressed in a way that spoke of wealth and control, his presence filling the space around him effortlessly. She was small, quiet, dressed simply, but there was something in her gaze that refused to shrink under his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate, until someone at a nearby table let out a nervous chuckle. "Kid's lost," he muttered under his breath. "Someone get her out of here." No one moved, because the man at the table hadn't taken his eyes off her. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low, measured, carrying easily through the silence. It wasn't a threat. Not yet. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him in a way that felt far too deliberate. "But I am," she replied. No hesitation, no fear, just a simple statement of fact. A few men shifted uncomfortably. Something about the exchange felt wrong, like a conversation happening on a level they couldn't quite follow. The man leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers tapping once against the table before going still. "What do you want?" he asked. That was when she said it. "I'm here to collect the debt you owe my daddy." The words landed like a dropped glass in a silent room. Sharp, jarring, impossible to ignore. This time, no one laughed, because something in her tone made it clear this wasn't a joke. The man's expression didn't change immediately, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps something deeper, something buried. Around him, his men reacted faster. "That's enough," one of them snapped, pushing back his chair as he stood. "Kid, you don't know where you are. Sit down." The command cut him off instantly. Reluctantly, the man obeyed, though his gaze remained fixed on the girl with open suspicion. The boss's attention never left her. "What's your father's name?" he asked. It was a simple question, but there was weight behind it, the kind that suggested the answer mattered more than anyone else in the room realized. The girl didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a small step closer to the table, close enough now that the distance between them felt almost symbolic rather than physical. Then she spoke. "You already know." The effect was immediate. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic reaction, but something in the air shifted, subtle and dangerous, like the moment before a storm breaks. The man's jaw tightened just slightly, his fingers curling once before relaxing again. He studied her more carefully now, not just as an interruption, but as a problem, a memory, a possibility. Around the room, whispers began to ripple, quickly suppressed but impossible to fully contain. Because everyone understood one thing. If she was telling the truth, this wasn't just a child wandering into the wrong place. This was something else entirely. Something personal. That's not possible, one man muttered, barely audible. Another shook his head. Has to be a setup. The boss ignored them. His focus had narrowed completely onto the girl in front of him. Who brought you here? He asked. I came by myself. The answer came too quickly, too easily. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded true, and that made it worse. No one just walks in here, he said. You did. A pause. Then, more quietly, because you let me. That landed harder than anything else she'd said so far. Because she was right. Whether he understood how or not, she had made it this far because no one had stopped her. Because something, somewhere along the line, had allowed it. The room had gone completely still now, every eye fixed on the exchange, every instinct on edge. The boss leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, closing the distance between them just enough to study her face more closely. He wasn't looking for fear anymore. He was looking for something else. Proof. Say his name, he said. The girl held his gaze. For a brief moment, the faintest trace of something crossed her expression. Not fear, not doubt, something closer to sadness. Then she opened her mouth to speak. And across the room, more than one man felt a chill run down their spine. Because whatever name she was about to say, they had a feeling it was going to change everything. The name she spoke didn't need volume to make an impact. It hit the room like a quiet explosion, freezing every man where he stood. For a moment, no one reacted. Then a chair scraped sharply. That's impossible, someone said under his breath. He's been gone for years. A ripple of unease spread, but the boss didn't move. He just stared at her, his expression tightening in a way most men in the room had never seen before. Slowly, he leaned back, eyes locked on hers. Who told you to come here? He asked, his voice colder now. I came by myself, she replied. Too calm, too certain. The answer didn't sit right with anyone. This could be a setup, one of the men muttered. Use the kid, get close, enough. The boss cut him off without raising his voice. Silence dropped instantly. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. The girl climbed into it, her feet dangling above the floor. The small detail, making the entire situation feel even more surreal. He watched her carefully. If you're telling the truth, he said, then you know what kind of debt you're talking about. She nodded once. My daddy said you'd understand. That answer tightened something in his expression. What exactly did he tell you? He asked. This time, she reached into her bag, and half the room tensed. But instead of anything dangerous, she pulled out a folded piece of paper and placed it on the table. He said if anything happened, damn, I should give you this. The boss didn't touch it right away. He stared at it for a long second, like he already knew what it meant. Then he picked it up and unfolded it. As his eyes moved across the page, something shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. His jaw tightened. His shoulders went still. And for the briefest moment, something like regret flickered in his eyes. What does it say? Someone asked carefully. The boss folded the paper again, slower this time, and set it back down. It says enough, he replied. That was all. No explanation. No details. Just enough to tell everyone this was real. The girl didn't look away from him. So, she asked quietly, are you going to pay your debt? A few men exchanged uneasy glances. One of them leaned forward. You don't even know what you're asking for, he said. She turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. I do, she said. He told me. The room didn't like that answer. Not at all. Because whatever this was, it wasn't small. The boss leaned forward again, resting his arms on the table, his gaze steady on her. Tell me, he said. What do you think I owe you? This time, she didn't hesitate. A promise. The word hung in the air, heavier than anything else she had said. Promises in this world weren't simple. They weren't forgotten. And they weren't broken without consequences. The boss studied her for a long moment, his mind clearly working through something deeper than anyone else in the room could see. Around him, his men shifted, uncomfortable with the direction this was going. We need to think about this, one of them said quietly. The boss didn't look at him. I am. His attention stayed on the girl. And for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not suspicion, not anger. Something more complicated. If I pay this debt, he said slowly, it won't end here. The girl tilted her head slightly. I know. That answer landed harder than expected. Because she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. The boss leaned back, exhaling slowly as he glanced around the room. taking in attention, the doubt, the unspoken warnings in every face. Then he looked back at her, and in that moment, everyone understood the same thing. This wasn't just about a debt anymore. It was about the past coming back to collect. And whatever happened next, none of them were walking away from it. The room felt heavier than it had all night, like the decision sitting in front of the boss carried more weight than any deal, any war, any threat he had faced in years. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Because they all knew this was his call. And whatever he decided, they would all have to live with it. The boss looked at the girl for a long moment, his gaze steady, calculating, but something else lingering beneath it. Something older. Something personal. Then, slowly he stood. Chairs shifted as his men straightened instinctively, tension snapping tight across the room. He walked around the table and stopped in front of her. Up close, she looked even smaller. Fragile almost. But her eyes didn't waver. Not once. "You don't understand what this means," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," she replied. "My daddy said you'd say that." A few men exchanged uneasy glances. This was going somewhere none of them liked. The boss exhaled through his nose, then nodded once, like he had just reached a conclusion he couldn't avoid. "A debt is a debt," he said. The words landed like a verdict. Immediate reactions followed. "Boss, this is a mistake. We don't even know if—" He raised a hand, and the room fell silent again. His eyes never left the girl. "From this moment on," he continued, his voice calm but absolute, "she's under my protection." That changed everything. You could feel it. The shift. This wasn't just about honoring a promise anymore. It was a declaration. A line drawn. And in their world, lines like that always came with consequences. The girl didn't react dramatically. She just nodded once, like this was exactly what she expected. "Okay," she said softly. The simplicity of it made a few men uneasy, because nothing about this situation was simple. The boss studied her for another second before asking, "What's your name?" She told him. He repeated it once, quietly, like he was committing it to memory. Then she did something that caught even him off guard. She held out her hand. Small, steady, waiting. For a brief moment, the room seemed to pause again. Because this wasn't just a gesture. It was something more. Acceptance. Trust. Or maybe a test. The boss looked at her hand, then back at her face. And after a second, he took it. Firm. Certain. Final. A few of the men looked away. Others watched more closely. Because they all understood something in that moment. This wasn't the end of a debt. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The boss released her hand and turned slightly, already shifting back into control, into command. "Get the house ready," he said to one of his men. "Security doubles starting tonight." "Boss." One of them hesitated, lowering his voice. "You really think this is safe?" The boss glanced back at the girl for just a second. Then his expression hardened into something familiar again. Untouchable. "No," he said. "I think it's necessary." That was the difference. And everyone in the room felt it. The girl stepped down from the chair, standing beside him now instead of across from him. Not as a stranger. Not as a visitor. But as something else entirely. Something claimed. Something protected. And somewhere beyond those walls, without anyone in that room realizing it yet, the consequences of that decision were already beginning to move. Because debts like this didn't come alone. They came with history. With enemies. With truths that didn't stay buried forever. And as the boss walked out of the room with the little girl beside him, one thing became clear to everyone left behind. Whatever was coming next was going to be bigger than all of them.